is August 28th, 2025, and Indian Prime Minister Modi is headed to China for the first time in over 7 years. Why? Well, one of the factors at play is the fact that the Trump administration has decided to double tariffs on India as punishment for their purchase of US sanctioned Russian oil. So Trump is helping get the gang back together. You're going to have Modi in the same place as Chinese President Xi Jinping, Russian President Vladimir Putin, oh, and more than 20 world leaders. The global south is getting the band back together, you could say, in China, and Trump is not invited. So, what does this mean for the ongoing tensions that all of these countries are dealing with the US? And what should we be keeping an eye on as the Trump administration is over here signing off on more missiles for Ukraine, more medium range missiles? We should note that the US would have to be directly involved in firing off every single time that Kiev wants to target Russia. Well, we got into all of the latest and more with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is international relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda. Mark, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Rachel, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Always good to have you. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, as more than 20 world leaders are set to gather in China this weekend for a summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. That lineup is expected to include Russian President Putin, and for his first visit to China in over 7 years, Indian Prime Minister Modi. Now, I have a feeling that Trump is going to be feeling a bit left out here, but how do you view the significance of this summit, not just for the strength of the BRICS alliance, but really the solidarity of the global south that we're seeing right now in the face of unprecedented tensions with the US?
Yeah, I think that this summit's going to go on for several days next week, and I think it's going to be the highlight of the week in geopolitical news and probably beyond. There's kind of three layers to this, and one is, all right, this is an annual presidential level meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which a lot of people get the Shanghai Cooperation Organization wrong, and part of that is the Western media who tries it out to be some anti-NATO or some alternative NATO, which is not what it is at all. I mean, it has security aspects, but those are all internal directed, right? It's not about military alliance. It's about countries cooperating on internal security. The three evils they talk about are terrorism, separatism, and extremism. Right? Those are what they cooperate, and terrorism and like narco crime and facilitated. They are transnational issues, right? Because criminals don't recognize borders, terrorists don't recognize borders. So that's the security aspect. But there's also economic and social and political aspects. But it is a Eurasian organization, which is to say that while BRICS is a global organization. I mean, you have countries, South Africa and Brazil. The SCO is more geopolitically focused on Eurasia, right? And breaking down, trade barriers, but also, barriers, political barriers, security barriers, or not just breaking down barriers, but cooperation among them. And they meet once a year. And of course, a meeting in China and the yearly presidential level meeting is big. It always is, particularly considering how much heavy geopolitical stuff is going on in the world right now that they need to discuss, right? And hopefully, the idea, of course, with these kind of multilateral summits is to come up with a consensus opinion and a statement on. Now, the second level is that what this is also China's 80th anniversary of the defeat of their celebration of the defeat of Imperial Japan in World War II. And this is a big deal for China in a similar way to what Victory Day in May over Nazi Germany is for Russia, because China is the country that, unbeknownst to many, lost the second highest number of people after the Soviet Union in World War II, and was facing brutal occupation atrocities by the Japanese Empire. That I mean, in some ways they make Nazi Germany look like amateurs, kids, with the heinous level of the crimes they committed against the Chinese people. So this is a big deal. The Chinese leader came to Moscow for Russia's celebration. Putin, of course, is going to be there for that, and there's going to be a whole lot of world leaders there. And it's very interesting that one part of the world is upholding these memories. At the time, the other side of the world is seemingly doing their best to forget those times and to, shall we say, even revivify them with Western open support for Banderite fascist ideology, political formations, and military units in Ukraine. Right? We had the Canadian Parliament applauding a literal Waffen-S veteran in Canada. There were recognition across the Western media up until 2022 of what was referred to as the Kiev regime's Nazi problem or neo-Nazi problem. But there's a long history of this too, because in the 1950s, Operation Red Sox, the U.S.-led West, tried to reinsert Waffen-SS veterans led on the ground by the CIA in a fascist revolution in Ukraine. Politico did a piece on it a few years ago, Operation Red Sox. And so all of this has happened before. All of this will happen again. They have no problems using Nazis, neo-Nazis, Banderite fascists as proxies and tools if it meets their geopolitical ends. The same way they have no problem using jihadis in Afghanistan or Syria or Libya or right-wing death squads in Central and South America. So it's every year you have this Russian-sponsored resolution in the UN condemning, whitewashing and apologia and revivification of fascist, Nazi ideology in the UN, and every year it's the U.S. and Ukraine who vote against it, and it is the European powers that mostly just abstain and play dead. But it is this other part of the world that is condemning it and doesn't allow people to forget it. So I think that's going to be a very important big deal this year, as however much Russia and China may want it and may not want to talk about it in these terms, we see two geopolitical blocks forming, right? And they have opposite positions on Palestine. They have opposite positions on Ukraine. They have opposite positions on World War II memory and revivification today. So that's just another clear division between the two geopolitical sides emerging, and that's why I think it's important, doubly so. There's a modern context to historical memory at this time. And the third thing is that, of course, there is it's beyond all of that, in that there is a huddling of these big leaders who are together in the BRICS. They are together in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and increasingly they're finding themselves in a geopolitical conflicts with a Trump-led, U.S.-led Western global hegemony, Russia, China, India, and others. Right, but those are the big three, and India in particular has just undergone punitive tariffs on top of normal Trump tariffs, bringing Trump's economic war against India to a tune of 50% tariffs on exports, and the big three, Russia, China, they're going to huddle. They're going to be talking about how they deal with this in economic terms, but in wider geopolitical terms, as well. And all of this is really good job, Trump. Are you've done the US has for decades been trying to woo India to its side as against China, and China India relations have deteriorated over the last few years. You're just pushing them back together, and they're doing all of this, and this will be Modi's first trip to China in 7 years. They're restarting direct airline flights. They're restarting border trade. They're settling things, and I think that this is a U.S. with the mask off moment for India. They tried to adopt a similar position of neutrality with these forming geopolitical blocks in the modern day, similar to India as the head of the non aligned movement in the first Cold War. That hasn't worked for them because the US doesn't even play by those rules anymore, right? You're either with us or against us. If you're not our vassal doing everything we say, like stop trade with Russia, and India says no, all right, tariffs, right? That's the punishment. And of course, India is on course to become a great power, eventually maybe a global power. Their population, their history, their economy, everything says it, and they have to maintain their sovereignty and independence if they don't want to just be a vassal colony of the West. And this is a moment where they've been forced to a decision that they were trying to sit on the fence in for a long time, and it's really not a tough one. There is, of course, strong economic interest for India involved here as well, because if they give up Russian energy in a time, they would then have to compete with, like, say, Europe for Middle East energy, raising prices, hurting everyone's economy, causing huge inflation in India, something that they can't afford as well. So there are geopolitical motivations for this, shall we say, the tripartite of Russia, China, and Iran, coming together. And it's not them. Iran will be there, of course, and Iran is facing the potential of a renewed conflict with the US and Israel in the coming months, something that is being chattering about. North Korea is going to be there as well. This is kind of a meeting of the dissenters. And there's a lot of hot geopolitical issues going on right now. So I think the discussions are going to be at a whole level of looking for cooperation and consensus on them, well above the normal business of a normal yearly SCO meeting, or even of this historical memory moment with the China celebrating the defeat of Nazi Germany on an 80-year anniversary. So I think this meeting is going to be a big deal. Now, don't expect declarations or everything. Most of what is, shall we say, discussed and talked about by these leaders is going to be behind closed doors. And they're not necessarily. Look for the actions in the 6 months to a year after and see what consensus may be reached between them when they all sit face to face with each other next week.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, it's fascinating to watch, as you were pointing out there. I mean, Trump has kind of helped put all of this together, right? I mean, you had Modi in this position where, yes, he's a member of BRICS, obviously. He's putting up with China in some ways, but all of a sudden, when Trump comes in and he doubles the tariffs on India that will impact, according to reports, over $48 billion worth of their exports, then they've got to look around and go, okay, what are we going to do if the US doesn't pull back on that, if Trump doesn't flip flop? Oh, we need to talk to literally everyone else, which getting everyone in the room together, I mean, that's incredibly important. And the US is the one that's left out of it, right? You can throw their European allies in there. They don't really matter at the end of the day. The US is the big one that's looking over here going, wait a second, threats and coercion, that was what we used to target countries around the world. Now we're watching all of these countries we threatened and sanctioned all here together, working together. I mean,
Yeah, that's the problem. The U.S. can dictate terms one on one, right? They can play the mafia dot and threaten to break your legs. But now all of the dissenters from this are looking to get and cooperate together against the US, and that makes the US very unhappy and very nervous.
Yeah, and as it should, right? And then you look at Trump and you're like, hey, you were just the final nail in the coffin, right? You had to go and double tariffs on India to throw them into this mix even more. So I know that a lot of the stuff was in the works, but still, the US is the one kind of pushing everyone over here, going, hey, you want a greater multipolar world? Okay, well, all you had to do was go after Russia, go after China, and now go after India. And this is what you're going to get. No, well, I have you here. I do still want to talk about the latest coming out of Ukraine, because obviously that is an ongoing conflict. And when I was researching it earlier this morning, I was hit with all of these different reports. They were very urgent, obviously, as we've been talking about. As you've been noting, this is a drone war of attrition. And you've got reports from earlier today that Russian drone and missile attacks targeting Kiev on Wednesday night damaged buildings in 7 districts, including the headquarters of the European Union mission to Ukraine and the British Council, which I thought was
Oh,
kind of interesting.
oh, how did that happen?
Exactly. Now, how do you view the current state of the war, and what does this tell us about where things stand?
Yeah, it is. A lot of people have, oh, was some secret deal reached in Alaska that we don't know about? No. All right. And one of the reasons that is while Russia, shall we say, um, decreased the tempo of the nightly drone and missile attacks on the Kiev regime going into and during the summit in Alaska. In the weeks since then, they've been ramping them right back up again, and that to me is a clear sign that no deal was, no secret deal was reached that they aren't talking about. No matter what 5G chess plans you want to imagine that Trump is maneuvering behind the scenes. And another big, I think, symptom of that, other than the resumption of nightly very large Russian drone and missile attacks all across the Kiev regime in Ukraine, and they can make all the claims they want about civilian trains and civilian buildings, but it was Amnesty itself that admitted early in the war that the Kiev regime uses every hospital, every school, apartment buildings as military points, and of course, that itself is a war crime. Never, if particularly if civilians are still in the area, but they will claim all sorts of things. That's the propaganda nature of a war, but. All you have to do is take a look what the actual UN recognized civilian casualties, right? The collateral damage of this conflict over 3 years, and how low that is for this large and scale of a conflict, and what low numbers women and children are even more in that. And then just compare the same thing to what's going on in Israel and Palestine, or let's say a regular US bombing of Yemen or something of the sort, and you can see clearly who is showing proper concern for civilians and who is targeting civilians and who is not. And so that is necessary to look beyond the propaganda. But kind of sneaking under the radar, it has emerged in the Wall Street Journal that Trump just signed off a deal to sell 3,500 plus new ERAM cruise missiles. Cruise missiles, let's put that in quotations. It's a new missile or a new variant on a missile that was being worked on by the U.S. Air Force and the Navy. And a year ago, it was decided to, shall we say, fine tune a variant of this specifically for the Kiev regime in Ukraine. And this has come to some kind of conclusion, and they have at least begun production. When I say 3,500, and it's going to start in 6 weeks, they're not going to get 3,500, right? They're going to produce them over time. But these are, they have a longer range without being long. Shall we say they're a medium range weapon? They're going to be able to hit theoretically deep behind Russian lines, inside Russia, operational rear, logistics centers, command and control, but they don't have enough of a range to reach, say, Moscow or St. Petersburg, if that puts it into context. So something not far removed from the Storm Shadow and the Scalp, but supposedly these are cheaper. The whole package is worth $850 million, which we're told the Europeans are mostly paying for. I love that word. Mostly, without any further details there. I don't know how much you Americans out there are actually paying for this. The Europeans are mostly paying for it. You're only paying for the not mostly part of it. But this is significant. This is an escalation by the Trump administration. It's still being kept very low. The problem with this, of course, it's not going to change the conflict at all, right? The Biden administration was forced to admit that its provision of the ATACMS ballistic missiles, firing essentially the U.S. firing ATACMS ballistic missiles into Russia, had no operational effect. Why? Because Russian electronic warfare and air defense quickly adapted to them and was able to shoot them down, let's say 6, 7, or more times out of 10 in a very short period of time, and they didn't have the numbers for it. Well, they'll have more of these. Similarly, they are GPS guided. There's talk about some inertial systems inside that should allow them to theoretically operate in jamming environments, with Russian electronic warfare. We'll see how well that actually works. Uh, I don't expect much from this. And Russian air defense, of course, on top of that, has been very, very successful in bringing down the British Storm Shadows, the Scalps, the ATACMS, everything else. What's more is that these have to be air fired, like the Storm Shadows and Scalps. And that primarily means the F-16s that have been transferred to the Kiev regime, which they keep having accidents with and losing airplanes just flying around and doing air defense exercises, hiding in West Ukraine. So they have to bring these things close to the contact line, well within range of Russian, much more modern aircraft with much longer range radar and much longer range air-to-air missiles like the R-37M, and within range of Russian air defense like the S-400, which means they're going to be putting these I can't say shiny new F-16s because they're old, decrepit F-16s that have been transferred instead. But these newly refurbished, supposedly F-16s, that's going to put them in vulnerable condition. So I don't expect this, but it's what they have. They can't accept Trump administration. They may want to extricate the U.S. from this, even if they dump it on Europe, but they can't accept Russian terms for an end to the conflict. So they're trying to force Russia by raising the costs to accept something closer to American terms and much less than what Russia, who is winning the conflict. What ultimately that means, a return to the Biden policy of sanctions and weapons, and the war goes on because Russia is not going to cut a deal because this isn't actually going to change much on the battlefield. So we're back from the jaw to the war, and Trump can try to claim this is not his war, this is Joe Biden's war. The new line out of the Trump administration: this is Modi's war. Modi is responsible for this,
Right.
not the Trump administration, which is sending 3,500 cruise missiles to Ukraine, but India for continuing to do trade with Russia. It's Modi's war now. Everyone's war but Trump's. I call BS on that. These are Trump's missiles against Russia. The Wall Street Journal went just like with previous. Every single missile will have to be approved by and receive targeting information from the US. That is a big fat kiss from Trump on every one of these cruise missiles every time they're fired. Sorry, Trump's missiles Trump's war.
So are you telling me that not only did we not get a secret deal in Alaska, but that the Trump who's telling everyone that he wants peace and that he wants to see the dying stop, that he's actually planning on sending more missiles to Ukraine? I'm shocked. But, watching this play out and watching the fact that the Wall Street Journal, they kind of buried the lead a little bit, right? They start out at the top. They're like,
Yep.
hey, it's been interesting. Trump, his administration, they haven't been, as they're trying to say, signing off on them, but in reality, carrying them out. That hasn't been happening. But then they throw in there, oh, but wait, it's going to happen. So, what are you keeping an eye on when it comes to kind of the tone? Do you think that the US is going to do this quietly, or do you almost expect some Trump temper tantrum where Putin doesn't give him the deal that he wants, and then, oh, Ukraine, Kiev, they just happen to have these weapons, and then we really start to see things escalate, similar to what we saw late last year?
Yeah, the Trump administration has just whiplashed to 180, right? In the closing years of closing months of the Biden administration, they began direct use of ATACMS missiles deep inside Russia, which is to say, let's cut through the proxy fig leaf. There was a Ukrainian in the room somewhere. Joe Biden was firing ballistic missiles into Russia, and Russia didn't respond by some quid pro quo, only because they knew Biden was leaving office right away, and the incoming president, Trump, was actively speaking against this, saying that it was crazy, that it would lead to World War III, and that he was completely against this. Now, several months into the Biden presidency, where he has failed to force Russia to accept an end to this conflict on U.S. terms, and he's doing a 180. Last week, he made some crazy social media post where suddenly he's saying Biden was forcing Ukraine preventing them from doing offense, not allowing them to use U.S. weapons to strike deep in Russia, which isn't true. They were. Right? And Trump actually stopped this when he first came into office. Right? Those ballistic missile strikes stopped. Now we're back to that, and Trump is signing off, not with ATACMS whistles, with ERAM missiles, but it's the same thing, except actually there's a lot more of them. So Trump has just done an incredible 180, and they're trying to palm it off on the Pentagon made a decision to stop the ballistic, the ATACMS strikes in Russia, for the last 6 months. The Pentagon didn't make that decision because the Pentagon was firing them under the Biden administration months before that. It was Trump who made the decision and told the Pentagon to stop those ballistic missile strikes. And now it is Trump who is effectively reversing that and telling the Pentagon, transfer 3,500 cruise missiles to the Kiev regime and help them fire them at Russia. So that's where we are. It is, again, it is Joe Biden's policy. You can call him Brandon Trump if you want to. Sanctions, now called tariffs. They're not called sanctions. They're called tariffs, secondary tariffs. It's not Trump's war. It's not Trump's missiles, because they're being bought mostly by the Europeans, right? I mean, that's the narrative that he's trying to sell his base now. And yeah, he's still trying to posture as some type of mediator, some type of peacemaker. Yeah, he's deserving of the Nobel Prize. Save all the children. Who's going to save the children of Russia and Ukraine? Because there's lots of Ukrainian children in parts that will be of Ukraine that will be targeted by these missiles from Trump's missiles. Who's going to save those children?
Yeah, they never seem to have an answer for that. I will also note, too, if anyone listening wants a more in-depth breakdown about these missiles and all of this, they can go check it out on your page on Boosty, available for paid subscribers. I would encourage you all to do that. He's got some good information there that goes beyond just what we're able to cover in our amount of time here. And I always appreciate you taking the time to join me to break down all the latest as we continue to keep an eye on what's going to happen as we go into the summit starting on Sunday. Certainly a lot at stake here all around. International relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda, thanks so much for your time and insight.
Thanks for having me.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/RachelBlevins. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.